Okay, welcome back to the channel. What's up guys and all the other YouTubery things. Title of this video is on the screen. It is harmony and secondary dominance. What do they sound like, I hear you ask? Well, here we go. Here is a really boring plain chord change in the key of D major, and it is not being treated at all. It sounds like this. Chord 6, chord 4, 6, 4, 1, 5, 1, and 5. And here I've done a little bit of a bolt on and I've treated it so you end up with some secondary dominance. So same chord change modified with secondary dominance. Here it comes. Here's another, ready? Now. Okay, so the definition of a secondary dominant looks like this. So to understand this, what you need to do is know what a primary dominant sounds like. The function of the dominant chord is the strongest way of getting back to chord 1, because there are lots of sort of scientific, if you study physics, lots of scientific reasons why it works. And we're tuned from the time of being small kids to feel that sense of resolution for everybody singing Christmas carols to us, happy birthday, etc, etc, etc. So here's what one sounds like completely plain. This would be primary dominant. We don't have to say that because it is we don't need to say primary because it's what we would expect. So the last little bit of this sequence finishes with a 5 to a 1. I'll put it on the screen so you can see it. So it goes chord come on, 6, 2, 5, 1. Done one more time for you. So that's really strong. We've got that 7th note in there that resolves to there. That G falls to the F sharp there. That gives us a really strong sense of resolution. The 7th falling to the 3rd of chord 1. Right, one more time. So that is the traditional function of a dominant chord. You can of course use them a million different ways, but that's what you'd expect to hear. So a secondary dominant is when you are doing that job but you are working on a key that's not in your tonic key. Alright, so to do this you'll need the following things available. We've just talked about what a dominant chord traditionally does. You'll need to know all of the keys up to 4 sharps and flats, and you'll need to understand that once we've done this change it may affect your melody because you're going to end up with notes which aren't in your tonic key. Alright, here are some instructions. I will leave this up on the screen in a second so you can do a follow along if you want. And I'll start going through that for you now. So here is our bog standard chord change, and what I've done here is put it on there for you. We've got the top 3 notes here functioning as the right hand of your piano. You've got this note down here doing the root note of the chord. I'm working in this progression here, and it's a very simple progression. What I've done is taken the traditional 4 chord trick, and I have done, which goes 6, 4, 1, 5. It's in a million different pop songs and commercial music at the moment, and I am doing the opening 2 chords twice, and then the remaining chords twice. That's all there is to it. That's how I generated that material. I'll get rid of that for a second. You can hear it here. Come on, son. And then this goes back to the beginning, just imagining that we're going back to the beginning. So it's really vanilla at the moment, very boring, very dull. It's got not a lot of colour to it, and we need to show that we're more sophisticated. So I do my usual chords tricks. We make sure we got some inversions going. So I'm going to take that bottom note there, which is a G, and I'm going to whack it up an octave. And then we're being as lazy as possible, which is always a good idea. Making another inversion here, take that note, a G again, put it up an octave. Oops, and it's just slipped. I'll quantize that. No, it's gone the wrong way. See, quantizing video. Right, and then here again, I've got this big ugly gap in the top here. That A there needs to come up an octave to create an inversion. And same thing again here. There we are. So that will sound a lot tidier. I won't bore it with you now. So be thinking about having 3 notes in your right hand and the root note in the bass. Right hand part, left hand part. Okay? Now you need to choose a chord which is going to be your target chord where you're going to do the secondary dominant. Now let's get one thing out of the way first. You cannot do a secondary dominant to chord 1 because that would be your primary dominant. We are doing a temporary modulation, changing key ever so briefly, so we need to choose a chord that isn't 1. Okay, so I'm going to do it to this chord here, which is chord 4. I'll put it on the screen for you so you can have a look at the notes if you're that way inclined. Here we go. It's a G major chord. That's really important for us to know. So we now need to create a gap for the secondary dominant to go in. So I take the preceding chord and I create a gap for it. Now I'm going to go for 2 beats. You could go for a crotchet, you could go for a whole bar, you could go for a funky syncopated type rhythm. It's totally up to you. So I'm leaving a 2 beat minimum gap there. Just remembering that my target chord here, without the crazy top note, is a G major chord. So at this point you would go on to your tables and you would find the key of G major if that was your target, and I have that written down for me here. Okay, so now I'm going to perform a basic cadence, a perfect cadence, which we go 5 to 1 like in that NAF example I showed you at the beginning, and we need to know what chord 5 is. So I go to chord 5 and just check those notes here. So the perfect cadence is chord 5 to chord 1. Now here is the classy trick that you do with a secondary dominant. Okay, what you must make sure you do before you go any further is get the 3rd in the bass. And then we're going to get this really strong pull underneath the music where we go like this. And that resolves really, really nicely. It's really good idea to have that in there. What other things do you need to know about secondary dominants? You need to include the 7th. That's really important because that's going to be your colourful note. The whole reason why this works is that when you do these temporary modulations, you end up with notes which aren't in the tonic key. So for instance, I'm just going to scroll down and show you D major again, which is our original primary key. There aren't any C naturals. D major uses C sharp. So the fact we're using this chord now in the piece technically doesn't fit, but it gives us a bit of spiciness. It's like chili on your chocolate. It just works. Okay, so we need that note in there. That's where we're getting the extra colour from. So I'm just going to memorize these notes. I've got F sharp already in the bass. That's the important thing. I need a D, an A and a C. And I'll go and look at the laziest way possible of putting those in. go, here we go. He said, come on, son. Well, I want to fall to the third of the next chord. That's always a good trick. More of which on another video. I need another D, and I need an A up there. So now we've got a tension there. Look, we've got dissonance between these two notes. Clash there. And it's going to resolve to this. And underneath, this is going to pull upwards and give us that sort of really strong sense of it coming home. So, a quick recap. Choose your target chord. Can't be chord 1, otherwise it'll be a primary dominant. We don't need those. We need a secondary dominant, so you choose a chord that's not chord 1. I chose chord 4. We made a gap for it by shortening the preceding chord, and then we checked our tables and we knew this is a G major. We're pretending it's the tonic key and we're doing a perfect cadence, and then we checked what chord 5 was and whacked it in. Right, one extra thing to do about this before I play you some examples that I've worked out for you. At the end of mine, my whole sequence resolves to a minor chord again, because the whole cycle is starting again. So when you're doing this to a minor chord, you just got to check a couple of things. So that's going to be my target chord. It's a B minor. I take my preceding chord, I create a gap, and now I need to know what this chord is, the target chord, which is B minor. You look at your table of keys, you go to B minor. We're pretending for the time being that is home, the tonic, chord 1. I need to insert a chord 5 to create a fake plagal cadence, as it were. Perfect cadence, how dare I. Very sorry there, children. And here is the important thing. Normally I say just use the natural minor, which is where we have a minor 7th between 1 and the 7th note of the scale. But we must make it a raised 7th using the correct harmonic minor scale this time. If you don't understand what all that means, that is fine. Just make sure that your note number 7 is only 1 semitone below the root, and then you'll be fine. And that will give us a major third between the root and the third in chord 5. That's really important, otherwise it's not a true dominant chord. So I've got my target chord, I've made a gap. First thing you do, put the third in the bass to be classy, which is there, an A sharp. And now I'm going to just finish in the rest of my notes here. I know in my piece for F sharp 7, I need to do a C sharp, I need an E, and I need an F sharp somewhere. That'll do. One little top tip here is, once you've used a third, particularly in a 7th chord, try not to use it in another voice, because you can overdo the third really easily if possible. Okay, so end of the piece now. That sounds killer, and one of the reasons why it sounds killer is that this chord goes really nicely into this chord, goes really nicely into this chord, and one of the reasons why it does is because you've got this semitone movement. Do it again. Missed. Start again, children. Here we go. There we go. That little semitone movement underneath gives us a really strong sense of pulling back to this target chord here. So to recap, you choose a chord which is not chord 1. You make space in the preceding chord so that you've got room for your dominant to go in. You make a note of what your target chord is, and then you look up the table of chords and you use the 5th of that chord in the gap that you've created. Now, when we're doing all of this, we haven't got any context. Okay, we don't know what this sounds like at all. So altogether it sounds like this, but it's naked, just piano. one of my favourite things to do composing is to set myself like a seemingly impossible challenge. So I thought I need to demonstrate this and prove it doesn't just work for classical music. So did YouTube trending. This is one of the top videos at the time. I think it's number 3 in the R&B charts at the moment. I'm not going to tell you the name of the song. You can see if you can work it out. And all I did to create this little backing track was I listened to the track that in question, and I realised instead of using a piano, it was using a synthy type sound. So here is exactly what I just played you using a really old-fashioned synth, which this track uses. You get the idea. And then I added a bass line by it was very easy actually. I copied the piano down, I deleted all of the right hand parts and made a bit of a funky rhythm on the bass notes, and I added a Logic drummer, which is not cheating. It's not strictly original. You wouldn't get a million of marks for the way you use Logic drummer, but they do sound good. And this sounds like this. Etc, etc. And then I added a melody over the top, and I really tried hard to copy the shape of this guy's melody, using a similar kind of structure to the way he did it. He's using very balanced phrases actually, and I copied the same sort of sound. Again, it's another retro synth in Logic, and I just faffed around with some of the settings, twiddling knobs at random, and it came out like this. Go round again. When you're adding a melody, you just have to make sure that you are taking into account the accidentals which your secondary dominant will create. So an accidental is a note which isn't in your original key. So I'm looking at D major here, and the roots tell us what all the key is. So we've got F sharp and C sharp. When I'm writing the melody and there is a secondary dominant going on, if it was that first one, I had to be aware that there could be a C natural in the melody instead of a C sharp, and there might be an A sharp going on in the melody if that's where I wanted to put, if I wanted to put a note, not an A natural, because that would clash with the chords going on underneath. 9 times out of 10 that would be unpleasant. It's an art, not a science, so all these things aren't necessarily true all of the time. It's a hell of a job, this. And right, so that's an EDM-y type thing. I don't pretend to be an expert at that kind of stuff, but it gives you the general gist. And here is, like, I tried to do a film version of exactly the same chord change. It came out sounding like this. He said, "Come on, son." Right, so where on earth did all that come from? Let's start with the bass. The basses are just doing repeated notes. That's a really common trick in cinema writing and computer game writing at the moment. And what they are doing is groups of 4. You can create more interesting rhythms than that. For example, 3-3-2 is really popular as well, thanks to Coldplay. So what I've done here is got this. This is just the bass note of the chord. He said, "Come on, son." Too busy swearing about Coldplay. Serves me right. Sorry, Chris. And I've used the velocity control there to create this strong beat on beats 1 and 3, and that's a real top tip if you're trying to sort of explore different sonorities, different timbres. That velocity control is really useful, so use it. It's much better than just automating decibel levels up and down. Okay, real instruments don't sound like that when they get louder and quieter. Their timbre changes as well, and computers are pretty good at emulating that nowadays. So that's where we are on the bass. It's just the root note of our chord progression, including the secondary dominant notes there and there. Okay, in fact, listen to how good this little sounds now here, okay? Just takes you back to the beginning so well with his secondary dominant and the third in the bass. The cellos are doing exactly the same rhythm, same pattern. Okay, groups of 4, strong on 1 and 3, quaver pattern, straight 8th pattern, and these notes are using the same trick as my 10th video, which is the preceding one to this one. So this is exactly the same trick that I showed you in there. Take the note that's being played in the bass, and I go a 10th above it, and that gives me the chords. So those two together sounds like this. And that's a really good trick, because the bass is all the way down here. Our next part's up there. If they were too close, that could sound really sort of like guffy and close and muddy. So those tenths are a great way of opening things up. Watch the preceding video. Now the second violins, what kind of thing are they doing? They are just alternating with pizzicato on notes in the chord. Doesn't work there, does it? I should put a E in there, I think. Does that work better? Yeah, that's better. Okay, and the first violins are doing the Hans Zimmer string glimmer. He uses this trick all the time. Loads of repeated notes in patterns of 4 and 5ths and 4ths apart. He loves that. Now I'm using pizzicato for this. A first violinist in a professional orchestra would absolutely kill you if you wrote this for them. If you listen to it on a movie, I'm 100% confident they'd be using the heel of the bow to play that. But if you did that with Logic, it would sound really mushy because the attack isn't right. So I'm faking it with pizzicato. Right, all together. Secondary dominant, ready? Those secondary dominants really add so much colour, it's really working. And lastly, I just did my melody writing video trick and put a melody over the top. By the way, if you don't fully understand where all the notes are coming from that, watch the using chords to create parts for single line instruments videos, which is a couple of weeks older than this. Right, melody on top with the horns, sounds a bit farty on Logic, but who cares? Okay, oh, it really wants to go round again because of that secondary dominant right at the end. And if you orchestrated that with some percussion, some extra bass, a counter melody going on, put the horns in octaves and started doing thirds and sixths and stuff with that melody, it would be sounding epic very quickly. So there you go. It's a slightly long video, turned into a bit of an arranging video at the end as well. but secondary dominant's a great way of adding colour to your pieces. So just quick recap of what you do. You choose a chord from your chord sequence that is not chord 1. You create a gap for it in the preceding space, and then you add the dominant chord of that target chord that you just chose to focus on. So you will need your tables to go through and have a look at how to look it all up. Right, YouTube stuff, like and subscribe, practice your craft and the art will come and all that nonsense, and I will see you again soon. Thank you very much, people. Bye bye.